thousands are still missing after the biggest terrorist attack in history. New images today of yesterday's plane crashes in New York. Remarkable courage and great loss as events are slowly pieced together. Here, tributes at the US Embassy as many British losses are feared too. In New York right now, all day rescue efforts have intensified as Americans try to come to terms with the biggest terrorist attack in history. The day has brought some harrowing stories of suffering and loss.
A blood-red sun hung over New York at dawn on the day after the disaster, the smoke as from a battlefield. If they thought they'd been asleep and dreaming, they could not have been more wrong. The nightmare did not stop with the new day. And after the fixed camera shots of yesterday have come new pictures from cameramen who were close to the attack. This was a routine drain inspection. The world was about to change. The pictures show the human scale of it for the first time. People were dying 100 stories in the air as first one airliner and then the other hit with ferocious accuracy. Guided missiles directed by unknown hands into random offices in the World Trade Center. The angle of the second plane and the size of the explosion helps to explain why the building never stood a chance. And now the cameramen were among those running for their lives.
And I just remember thinking that after a couple of seconds, this is coming at me, and I'm not going to get out of the way. So I just turned the camera over my shoulder, pointed it up in the air, and just started running. And I've seen footage of volcano ash chasing down a village, and just knew that I was going to be in a really nasty situation. And I just dove under the biggest emergency response vehicle that I could see.
But this was no volcano, it was a man-made disaster, and the dust and smoke billowed through the amazing glass canyons of New York. And then, as night fell, they worked on and on, putting out the fires, worrying about the safety of surrounding buildings and looking for survivors, knowing that maybe 300 firefighters had been in the Twin Towers when they collapsed, among thousands of other people.
Boom, hit with all the dust, and it was black. I mean, pitch black. I don't know anybody could have survived being on the street at that time.
Personal possessions were tossed aside. What happened to the girl whose doll now lies among the debris? No one will hazard a guess as to the number of dead. Thousands died, certainly. The mayor of New York said it'll be a figure too hard to bear.
I just wanted to make sure that everything is here that could be here, and it is, so we just pray to God that we can save a few people.
In this most community-spirited of nations, people lined up to give blood.
Everything we can do to help at this time is important, so this is just a small sacrifice compared to the suffering that's going on.
And there's been potentially an early breakthrough in the criminal investigation. A hire car has been seized in Massachusetts with an Arabic language flight manual on the back seat. The FBI also found a videotape on how to fly airliners and a copy of the Quran. Even the seats where 5 Arab men are supposed to have sat down in the airport were taken away for forensic tests. The only planes in the air over America in the last 24 hours have been the Air Force, including Air Force One, the jumbo jet which carries the president, and the fighter jets escorting it. Now the president is back in Washington, rallying world opinion for action against America's enemy.
This enemy hides in shadows and has no regard for human life. This is an enemy who preys on innocent and unsuspecting people, then runs for cover. But it won't be able to run for cover forever. This is an enemy that tries to hide, but it won't be able to hide forever. This is an enemy that thinks its harbors are safe, but they won't be safe forever. This enemy attacked not just our people, but all freedom-loving people everywhere in the world.
Goes on to treat the injured and seek any more survivors. To say that the emergency services were overstretched is an understatement, and all this in a city where normal communications were fractured. This morning, rescue workers were given new impetus when 6 firefighters were found alive in a space under the rubble.
Well, they were fortunate enough to fall into a void. When the building fell, there must have been a part of the structure that kind of surrounded them and protected them from the falling debris. So when the debris fell on the side, they were in an air pocket. And they just stayed there until help arrived, because there's a lot of voids down there. The building, the first few floors, is kind of still intact. So I'm hoping that most people undergrade, there might be a lot of voids, but unfortunately most people that were above the first few floors, very little hope as far as I know.
Stopped at a police line.
We're asking everyone to move back.
Now the people that were evacuated from the...
With so much anguish.
In Washington, congressmen gathering to return to their offices burst into spontaneous patriotic song. But America will take more than a song before it's healed.
God bless America.
Sure, I think that you don't take drastic action until you know who was responsible. But I was quite heartened, as a matter of fact, having gone through some of these same types of situations in the past, never one as bad as this, that the president said, look, we're no longer going to just look to the people who commit these terrorist acts. We're going to look to the countries and the people that harbor those terrorists and permit the creation of these events. Well, that would be my hunch, yes, although I must tell you I'm not privy to the classified information, and therefore that's only a hunch. But when you look at what happened to the USS Cole when in the port in Yemen, when you look at what happened to our embassies in Tanzania and Kenya, when you look at what happened in the Khobar Towers bombing, which may or may not have been Osama bin Laden related, you have to at least put him very high at the top of the list.
Mr. Baker in Washington.
Well, the sense of utter disbelief that marked yesterday's events has given way to the searching questions about what precisely happened, but also emerging are the harrowing human stories. We've now got a much clearer picture about events on the 4 aircraft used by the terrorists. You can see here Boston to the north, Washington to the south, and New York in between the two. Boston's Logan Airport was the starting point for 2 of the aircraft, American Airways Flight 11 and United Airlines 175. Both were bound for Los Angeles. Both were hijacked shortly after takeoff and were forced to head to New York. The target, downtown Manhattan and the World Trade Center. 92 people were on board the first plane to strike one of the Twin Towers. 20 minutes later, a Boeing 767 with 65 people on board hit the other. In Washington, meanwhile, American Airlines 77 takes off, also bound for LA, and is immediately commandeered. Its new destination, the side of the Pentagon building just outside the Capitol. 64 people were on board that one, including a CNN commentator, Barbara Olson. She managed to call her husband, the US Solicitor General, Theodore. She said, the plane has been hijacked. They had knives. They rounded up the passengers and the pilots in the back of the plane. What do I tell the pilots to do? Well, another person on that flight was Peter Gay. He'd been due to leave the day before, but had to delay his trip. Today, his father, Peter Gay Sr., spoke of the moment.
Son David, who's sitting here, came in the house and said, I got something to tell you. And said Peter was on that plane that hit the airport, hit the tower.
And he said his son was the kind of man who'd have intervened, who'd have tried to have stopped the hijackers.
And when I hear that there were knives used and that they might have got the stewardess first, let me tell you, boy, Peter would have jumped out of that chair and went for that guy, I'm damn sure. And maybe he was knifed down also, because there was some story about someone calling on a cell phone saying that there was some stabbing going on. He was such an efficient man. Such a good boy.
Peter Gay Sr. Now to the 4th plane, UA-93. It takes off from Newark, New Jersey, bound for San Francisco. It crashes just north of Shanksville, near Pittsburgh. Its probable target was the presidential retreat of Camp David. It was from this flight that possibly one of the most distressing accounts emerges. 31-year-old Mark Bingham phoned home, speaking first to his aunt, Kathy Hoglan, and then his mother, Alice. Both were clearly in a highly charged emotional state when they spoke today.
He just said, I want to let you all know that I love you very, very much.
in case I don't see you again.
I said that.
That the plane has been taken over by hijackers. And then I said, well, we love you very much too, Mark. Let me go get your mother.
And he said, hi, Mom, this is Mark Bingham. That would be his last name. And he said, I want to let you know that I love you. And I'm flying, I think he said I'm in the air from the plane. We've been taken over. There are 3 men that say they have a bomb. And I said, well, who are they, Mark? And he repeated that he loved me, and he said, I don't think he said, I don't know who they are. He became distracted there, as if someone was speaking to him, and he said it's something to the effect of, it's true, and then the phone went.
Paul II said it was a dark day in the history of humanity. The European Commission President Romano Prodi said the world was today standing close to America. Iran, hardly a close ally of America's, has been expressing deep sorrow and sympathy. And Libya's Colonel Gaddafi described the event as terrible. He said he was offering aid to the American people. Biggest question right now is how...
The Pentagon at dawn this morning, the heart of America's military might, deeply wounded, deeply traumatized. But the military hardware controlled from here is still in place. The ships, the planes, the soldiers, all at a high state of readiness. Their commanders on morning television talking openly of war.
American people have a clear understanding that this is a war. That's the way they see it. You can't see it any other way, whether legally that is correct or not.
You do too?
And yes, I do. And we've got to respond as if it is a war. And we've got to respond in the sense that it isn't going to be solved with a single counterattack against one individual. It's going to be a long-term conflict.
They should look at political solutions. Why the American administration is hated in the Middle East and all over the Muslim world. Definitely there is something wrong in the American foreign policies. They have to look at this, and they have to listen to their friends in Europe and in the Middle East.
But subtle diplomacy, compromise, is not high on America's political agenda this evening. At the Pentagon, it was announced that no more survivors would be found here. And as the clear-up begins...
Many others, I feel deeply for what has happened in this, I think, simply horrendous tragedy that is hard to comprehend. And again, I can only say that all those who have lost their lives, and indeed those who are related and have loved ones who have lost their lives, are very much in my thoughts and prayers. I think, like all these things, there's a great need for cool heads. I mean, I remember so well when Lord Mountbatten was blown up in a boat that, like all these things, one always wants to rush around doing all sorts of things, but you have to, I think, sometimes think carefully. But I have nothing but the deepest sympathy, and we're all with the American people in this terrible tragedy.